Ever since USC mounted that historic comeback at the Rose Bowl led by Sam Darnold, preseason prognosticators have gone wild, just kind of projecting where the Trojans might be headed in 2017. Nick Dempsey from Conquest Chronicles joining me to talk some USC football with kickoff just about 58 days away, Nick. So we appreciate you jumping on board, and it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Longest 58 days ever, but they'll end. They will end one day. Football will be back, so hang in there.
So this team lost quite a bit, as is typical among the elite in college football. Or guys go early to the NFL draft. It happened to the Trojans, but with all the talent coming back and with arguably the best quarterback in the country and all that momentum from what we saw the last 10 or 11 games of last season, people are excited in Trojan Nation to see this team take the field and possibly contend for a national championship. We're not going to slam on the brakes today, but we're going to put a cautionary tale to the hype just a little bit and raise just a little bit of concern of what USC may need to face and overcome to be the best team in the Pac-12 and contend for a national championship this season. And one would be those 12 teams that they have to face in 2017.
Yeah, so I'm not trying to harsh anyone's buzz here, but there are some things, if they're going to make a run at the conference championship or the playoffs, there are some things they're going to have to contend with. And the first one is the schedule, and it's brutal. And it's not just brutal for the teams they have to play. That's sort of something they do every year. They have a tough slate, but they have 12 weeks in a row where they play. Their bye week does not come until the final week of the season. I believe it'll be Thanksgiving week. The 25th of November, something like that. So 12 weeks in a row, that's hard to do. The nagging injuries mount up, fatigue mounts up. Historically speaking, at least in the Pac-12, teams that have had that happen do not fare as well because it's a really tough thing to do. Stanford last year, if you'll recall, had they played the first week. Their bye week was week 2, and they had to go 11 straight. And they struggled quite a bit. They had some other difficulties, but without that bye week sort of mid-season to reset and just sort of figure out their issues and get guys healthy, it really took a toll. Arizona, I believe 2 years ago, also had a similar predicament, and they just sort of fell apart. I mean, the injuries just wrecked them, and they didn't have any time to get anybody healthy, to get the backups like a week off to prep and get them up to speed. Just like every week they were just sort of in this new situation where they just had to try to make the best of it and couldn't really compete. So USC is facing that very same situation. So it's going to be tough without that break, without that reset button. If you go on a losing streak or you lose a heartbreaker of a game to a rival, and you don't sort of get that break after, it's going to be tough. And it amplifies the difficulties that you normally face in a regular year. Like week 2 out of the gate, they got Stanford. The Stanford, I believe, has won 3 straight on them. Then right after that, they play Texas, which are 2 home games, which is nice, but that's 2 tough opponents, in theory anyway. But then, also all the little trap games, if you don't have time to start thinking about those, like I'm looking at this Friday night, September 29th at Washington State up in the Palouse. In a vacuum, USC is better than WSU. No question. Probably. But Friday night in the Palouse, that screams trap game. And again, if you had a bye week, you could sort of, prep for this and take a few extra minutes, have time to get your guys prepped for that rowdy atmosphere. The weather's probably going to be, bizarre to say the least, if not downright brutal. So and then you got to go on the road to Notre Dame, which is always a tough out. Notre Dame usually likes to schedule, when they have USC at home, they like to schedule their bye the week before USC. So you go on across the country to your rival. They might be coming with a week off. All these things start to add up. You got to go on the road to Colorado, and then you finish up with the rivalry game at UCLA. You'll be coming into that UCLA rivalry game playing 11 straight games. Who knows how you'll be health-wise as a team. all these things, are tough enough on their own, but they're amplified when you got to go 12 straight. Now, having said that, if they do make the Pac-12 championship, they'll get a bye week going into that game, which would be, good for them. But 12 is if they're gonna make the Pac-12 championship game, they've got a tough 3 months straight where they're gonna have to really, really defy some expectations, defy historical odds, I should say. So it's not like they don't know it's coming. They're going to prep for it, but it's going to be difficult, and they're going to have to, tough it out and really make some things happen.
So, Nick, they don't have an opener that gets everybody's attention like they did last year with the attention getter, Alabama, but they do have Western Michigan. So it's not a game that they have UTEP or San Jose State, a traditionally downtrodden program, that they're going to automatically win 52-3 and move on to the next week, and most likely spend a lot of practice time prepping for a Stanford in game 2. Western Michigan, yes, they lost one of the best wide receivers in college football, lost their coach in PJ Fleck, who moved on to Minnesota. But I think we've seen it with Boise State, with a few other programs like that, where they're strong programs. And even though the first coach that got them onto the scene and made the mark moved on, they still stayed in place as a strong program. And I've got a feeling, based on what I know, what I've heard of the Western Michigan situation, we could see the same thing out of them, that even though PJ Fleck is the guy that put them on the map and he's moved on, that it may stay a pretty strong team. And they're 72nd ranked according to the ESPN Power Index. So they're not a bottom feeder, 115, 120 out of the 128. They're a pretty solid football team that USC is going to have to, sure, they have the potential to go in there and it could be 38-0 at halftime. But most likely this is going to be a game that's competitive for a half, and USC pulls away and wins by 20 to 25 points in the second half. But they're going to have to leave their starters out there deep into the third quarter until they pull away. Most likely it's that kind of game. So they can't just roll over Western Michigan and prep for Stanford and get healthy and all those things and be ready. I think there are 2 games, and they're both out of conference. And then there's a couple in conference, and you could say this about any schedule, that could really make this a brutal schedule, or it could be manageable. Is Texas going to take an enormous leap, as many expect them, with Tom Herman? So are they 5-7 Texas from 2016 that USC is significantly better than? Or are they the chic pick that a lot of people have as contending for a Big 12 championship, and maybe more like a 10-2 team or a 9-3 team this year? Texas, that makes that a monumental kind of game. Same thing with Notre Dame going on the road. Are they taking on the team that couldn't hold an opponent under 50 points a half? It seemed last year Notre Dame was awful on defense.
Oh God, yes.
And of course USC took them to the house in the second half last year. Or does this Notre Dame talent that we've heard so much about, that's been recruited in the top 10 or 15 in the nation, is this going to be a really good Notre Dame team? And then in conference, is UCLA back at it? Are they back to being a 9 or 10 win team? Or which I would expect them maybe not to be quite that good, but they're not the 2-7 in the conference and 4-8 team that we saw last year. I expect UCLA to be significantly better. And I think Arizona State's, to a lesser degree, a bit of a wild card. They could be a tough out, or USC could roll over them if they're anything what they've been the last 1 to 2 seasons.
Yeah, Arizona State is definitely confusing. They started out red hot last season. I believe they were 4-0, and then they just sort of fell apart. UCLA just seems to keep getting hit by injuries, and year after year, it just seems to be significant players, several of them every year. So they've got talent, but can they stay healthy, I think is my concern there. And I would put Colorado on that list. Are we talking about the same Colorado that won the South? Or are they returning to form or regressing to the mean, if you will? So that could be interesting. They got to go on the road there. It's not easy for a team in LA to go up into the mountains and play in what'll probably be pretty cold by that point in the season. And on the road in general is tough. And if this is a good 10+ win Colorado team, that's another tough out. So this could turn ugly schedule wise, or it could turn very beneficial for USC. And, it's all speculation in June, but as we get further into September, that'll start to flesh itself out, and we'll kind of be able to see, okay, this is what we're really dealing with schedule wise. But the one thing we do know is that 12 straight weeks is going to be a killer. And how they manage that, is, I think, going to go a long way towards their success and whether or not they reach their goals. And it seems so far not many coaches, at least in the Pac-12, have been able to figure out how to manage that without some adverse effects. So that's my biggest concern schedule-wise. Any one of these teams in a vacuum, I could see USC beating, but when you start to add in all these other things, it's going to get concerning.
And to your point about the Buffs, and when this game is being played, it was 2 years ago before the Buffs were any good record-wise, and before we knew that talent was going to come together the next year, that a USC team that won the South went to Colorado and had to pull that game out in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game in Boulder. So that's going to be a difficult trip, you would think.
I agree.
All right, Nick Dempsey, myself, get together from time to time. We talk some USC football. You can catch it right here on our USC channel, and catch the segments as well at Mark Rogers TV. Catch the audio on iTunes or in Podbean at Mark Rogers TV. Just to make that your search. So these are 3 reasons why Nick is putting the brakes on the USC hype. Yes, the Trojans are loaded. They're talented. They're ready to roll. Most likely the best team in the Pac-12. But there are some causes for concern. And the second one is everybody loves to see who's coming back at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and the flashy players. And certainly the glitter is on at USC in 2017. But the offensive line, those guys make it all work. And there are some possible concerns there.
Yeah, this offensive line is I think, on the field anyway, the biggest question mark for USC. And they're losing 3 starters from last season, Damian Mama, Zach Banner, Chad Wheeler. So 3 of their 5 gone there. And then 3 other guys that had significant playing time on the line. Vianney Talamabayo, he's missing off the entire offseason for bicep surgery, but he should be back by September. Toa Lobadan dealing with a knee injury. He should be back by fall camp. And then Nico Fala is dealing with a back issue. He missed a lot of the contact drills, at least in spring camp. So I believe Coach Helton used the phrase, with the offensive line right now, you're just trying not to tear your hair out, which is not does not exactly inspire confidence, because for all the talent they have at running back and quarterback and wide receiver, and certainly on the defense as well, it's tough to win a conference if you can't win the line of scrimmage. And right now, the offensive line coach, Neil Callaway, has been shuffling guys around, doing everything he can do to try to get guys, ready to go. But in spring practice, at least, the O-line was just getting kind of crushed by the defensive line. And so, you can have Sam Darnold could be, the best player out there and certainly Heisman worthy, but if you can't keep him upright and if he's always outrunning defensive lineman before he can set up a play, it's over time that's going to cost you. It will have to at some point. So they're going to have to hopefully get the 3 guys back healthy and then figure out the last 2 spots. But we might see early on in the season, especially, we might see the offensive coordinator, T. Martin, really sort of have to adjust his play calling so that, maybe shorter passes, quicker out routes, working the outside more, in case the offensive line just isn't winning the battles up front. And if that's the case, now you're off your main plan, and, Clay Helton loves balance on offense. He's not going to be able to do that. So it's a huge cause for concern. I have plenty of faith that Neil Callaway is going to get him there. He's a great offensive line coach, but they just have a lot of question marks. Really, at this point, kind of nothing but question marks on the offensive line.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, because of the injury issues in the spring, the best 5 never really got together to be able to play together. And as we know, at the offensive line, It's about continuity. It's about chemistry up front. Those guys have to work together. Unlike any other unit on the football field, they have to be in sync. And also, it causes coaches, because of that ingredient, to not necessarily always get to play their 5 best players, because particular guys are very versatile. Other guys need to play guard. Or need to play, well, if your tackle is that good, he can usually play guard or tackle. But sometimes the lesser athletic guys have to play guard, or you're exposing yourself too much. Therefore, you can't maybe necessarily play your best 5 guys. And that's what the coaches want. They want their 5 best offensive linemen there, and then they want to be able to mix and match and put them at their best position. That's the best case scenario. It doesn't usually come out to be that clean, but something close to that. And USC's had difficulty because of the injuries getting the guys on the field to practice, especially there in the spring. So we'll see what happens here the first week of August.
Yeah, it's going to be a very important fall camp for these guys. They're going to have to get it together. And to your earlier point about Western Michigan, that would have been a situation where this season in particular, to get those guys up to speed, having a sort of a professional rent-a-victim to bring in week 1, to just get them used to playing and at full speed and getting hit at in getting, just getting all their assignments right at full speed would have been great. But, Western Michigan, as you said, not as easy as an out as perhaps a lot of people think. And then week 2, they got to go right up against Stanford, which has turned winning the line of scrimmage into a borderline fetish at this point. But so it's not going to be easy. If that offensive line hasn't really got their stuff together by week 2, Stanford could really come out and just sort of push those guys around, and they're going to have to figure out a way to beat Stanford without winning the line of scrimmage, and that's just going to be tough to do. So this offensive line, I think they'll get there, but the question is, how bad is it going to get before they get there, and how much risk are you putting your quarterback in, your Heisman candidate quarterback in every single play until they get there. And so it's going to be difficult. I think that's the biggest area of concern, because if you take out, the passing game and you can't really open up running lanes, all the Sam Darnolds in the world probably can't do enough to, help you. So they're going to have to figure it out on O-line, but I think they'll get there. I'm hoping they'll get there.
Nick Dempsey and I are talking USC football. Nick from Conquest Chronicles breaking down the Trojans late in June as we head toward summer camp the first week of August. And before that, Pac-12 Media Days, where we get to hear from Clay Helton and some of the star players for the Trojans and what they think about the expectations for 2017, which we know are going to be odds-on favorite to win the Pac-12. But there are a few possible challenges in the way. One would be schedule. One would be some issues at the offensive line position. The third could be anytime you're talented, like USC, like some of the top programs in the country, you lose a little bit more talent and top-level talent than the other schools you're competing against, such as the case with USC from 2016. So they lose some talent, some playmaking ability. They lose some leadership possibly as well, Nick.
Yeah, so it's you lose a guy like Dory Jackson is a perfect example. On the stat sheet, he's amazing, right? He did everything on all three phases of the game. But you also, what sort of doesn't still show up in the stat sheet is that college football especially is a very emotional game. It's prone to momentum swings, sometimes wild momentum swings. And a guy like a Dory Jackson didn't just score touchdowns and get critical interceptions. He would swing momentums in games. Juju Smith-Schuster was another guy like that, at least earlier in the season and certainly last year, where he could just make a big play and get everybody fired up, and all of a sudden he's got his team playing like they can do no wrong, and that sort of shows up on the field. You get a guy like Zach Banner on the offensive line who, the offensive line generally doesn't make momentum swinging plays unless they're negative. But he was definitely a leader in the locker room and on the sidelines. And you're losing all these guys that there's plenty of talent that will show up on the stat sheet coming up behind them, especially in this wide receiver group and in the running back group. But who is going to step up and, make that big kick return that swings the momentum of a game or gets the interception or like gets guys hyped up in the locker room and keeps everybody focused, even if you've had a bad half. And, you got to go into halftime and get your mind right and get everybody refocused and re-energized. Who does that? And the easy answer is you could say, oh, Sam Darnold, he's the quarterback. He's a dynamic playmaker. But the answer for every single question or problem USC faces this year can't be Sam Darnold, or it can't just be any one guy, right? It's a team sport. So it's who steps up. So for all the exciting and elite talent that's coming in, and man, is it good that we've seen from this recruiting classes that we've seen develop already in spots last season and the season before. Who's the leader here? Who steps up? Who's that one guy we were like, all right, we have to move the ball 5 yards to keep this thing going, and if we don't, we lose. Who's that guy we're going to point to and say, yep, that's the guy. He's going to make it happen. And when the team morale is down or things are going wrong, who's the guy you can point to and say, okay, he'll get him fired up. He'll get his unit focused up. He's going to take the lead here. I think that's something you're going to find out, especially right now in like player run practices where there's no coaching or there's no coaches running it. You'll see who sort of steps up as the season goes on. Maybe some playmakers will develop, but teams rely a lot on those playmakers and those leaders to really kind of get them through the ups and downs and momentum swings of a game. And right now, other than Sam Darnold, there really isn't one definitive guy or handful of guys, because you really need a handful that you can point to and say, yeah, this is the guy when the going gets tough, this is the guy that's going to make it happen. The encouraging thing is that in the Rose Bowl, actually, when Dory was out and their top linebacker was ejected for targeting, other guys on the defense stepped up. So the talent's there. Other guys have that capability, but we still need to see who is going to do that throughout the course of the season. And so this is probably the least concerning of my three, because they're there. We just don't know who they are. But it is still an issue. Like, you don't necessarily have to achieve the same statistical results as a Dory Jackson, but who's the guy that can swing the game momentum? And so they're in there somewhere. We don't know who they are. But again, if there's no leadership or playmakers that step up other than, the presumed Sam Darnold, this could be, again, another issue long-term that they'll need to deal with.
And to go back to your aforementioned issue of offensive line, Zach Banner, Chad Wheeler gone, two guys that could be depended upon moving on to the NFL. You talk about Adoree Jackson and Juju Smith-Schuster being the headliners that have moved on and their tremendous talent, but also guys like Leon McQuay, Justin Davis, a steady performer at running back, moving on to the NFL. So a lot of guys in a lot of spots that are going to have to be filled in by guys that probably have just as much talent, save Dory and Juju to a certain extent, but guys that have as much talent but aren't proven. So
yeah,
guys with talent not be able to cut it on game day all over college football and not become productive impact players. So USC, with the question marks that every team in the country has, they just have a little bit more talent than just about everybody to make up for it. But schedule, offensive line, and the leadership playmaking void issues that could arise and hopefully won't. But if USC doesn't have quite the season that a lot of people are expecting, those could be the reasons why.
Yeah.
Nick Dempsey, Conquest Chronicles, and myself get together to talk USC football. Join us on our YouTube channel where we talk nothing but Trojans, and also have the individual segments ready for you on Mark Rogers TV. If you just want to hear the audio, you don't want to stare at us, we totally understand. You go to Podbean or you go to iTunes and you look up Mark Rogers TV and you see the USC content right there. All right, Nick, good stuff. We appreciate the time as always.
Of course, Mark, anytime.